have any problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
It worked so well last week.
We got this.
We got this.
Okay. It says we're live.
We're live. Okay, welcome. Thanks everybody for coming back. This is our second working on live streaming this Tranquil Tuesdays special series on mental health. And I am just making our amazing guest, Yashar, Dr.
Okay.
K, Dr. Khosroshahi,
Close. You
our
know what? I won't take any points off. I promise.
um, our guest. So tonight we're talking about mindful masculinity. And yeah, this is the Mind Week of our 3-part series talking about men's mental health and raising money for the Movember Foundation. And I'm just so thrilled that we have Dr. K, as he is called, here with us tonight. Dr. K is a naturopathic doctor, but he is out of clinical practice right now doing brain-based executive coaching, which I just think is so cool. And I'm just really interested in, learning more from you tonight, Yashar, and I'm sure everyone joining us is excited to hear, more about this idea of mindful masculinity and what that looks like.
Thank you, Katie. And like I said to you right before we came online, if you're not having technical difficulties, you're not trying new things online. So credit goes to you to have the courage to set something up like this and have it kind of be put to the test. So here we are, and I'm happy to be here. Sincerely, a big thank you to you, Dr. Katie, for coordinating this event, and of course, for having the trust in me to facilitate this discussion. And of course, all of you that are listening now or are going to be listening to the recording, I want to acknowledge you as well for showing up and taking time out of your busy schedules to learn something meaningful and hopefully impactful for you. So the goal is for the next 15, 20 minutes for me to hopefully empower all of you with tools that are tangible and practical that will help you step into your masculinity in a more mindful way. And I guess I have a secondary goal to that, and that is that you share this information with your family members and your friends so that we can spread this message and we can all live a more physically and mentally healthy version of ourselves. But before I dive into the meat and potatoes of this presentation, I think it's important I do give a little bit of a brief background on myself and the company that I run so that you understand the lens that I bring to this discussion. My company is called Mindshift Leadership, and we're a leadership development company. We believe wholeheartedly that leadership is both a privilege and a responsibility. And we believe that everyone is a leader, but not everyone practices leadership skills. And it is that we see that leadership is not a title, but a tool for capacity building for the individual first and foremost, and then for the collective, whatever that may look like, for your family unit, for your athletics, for business. It doesn't matter. You first have to lead yourself, then influence others within your collective. And we believe that the future of leadership must prioritize inclusion, mental health, and performance optimization. And so my sister and I are actually co-founders of the company. Isla's background is in social justice and as a strategist. And as just mentioned, my background is in medicine and also performance. And together we're brain-based executive coaches. And the company has these pillars where we combine the neurosciences, performance psychology, strategic planning, and mindfulness techniques to empower you to lead better by thinking better. And that brings me full circle to why we're here tonight. It's for you. I am here to help you be the leader of yourself and of your health that you are meant to be by questioning, embracing, and expressing your whole self. I want you to step into your masculinity in a mindful way. As Dr. Katie mentioned earlier, I've spent over 10 years as a naturopathic doctor, as a health psychology teacher, and as an executive coach. And what all of these roles have in common is that I help you show up as the best version of you. You see, at Mindshift, we use multiple modalities and methodologies, and we geek out on the science, and we love going deep into every rabbit hole of what's happening in the mind body. But at the core of everything that I ever do, whether it be this conversation or any other conversation that I have the privilege of having with you, is I'm trying to teach you the transformational tool of self coaching for you to learn how to speak to yourself and rewire your mind body connection so that you're able to reframe your anxieties, your doubts, your griefs, and perhaps even your regrets. So you can show up to your work, your relationships, your life with hope, optimism, and resiliency, like a leader, right? And so after countless conversations, I've been lucky to have patients and clients ranging from athletes to business executives to individuals undergoing end of life care. And I have realized that without a strong and understood relationship with ourselves, we often suppress our own ability to grow and succeed as a leader of ourselves. But the reality is, no one comes up to me and says, "Hey, coach, I want your help so that I can have a strong and understood relationship with myself." Right? The reality is, people come up to me and say things like, "I'm struggling with work. I'm struggling in relationships. I'm holding on to trauma. I've been hurt by somebody or my own thinking." You know, everyone has their own details and their own way of describing these hurts, these traumas, these relationship issues, these work issues. And essentially they're saying, "Hey, coach, how can I do better?" And what I have come to learn through all these conversations, and hear me when I say this, that by me telling you what to do or how to do it, the conversation is anemic at best. Because simply knowing how to do something doesn't necessarily mean you'll get it done, right? The whole idea, the simple concept, when you know better, you do better, that's not entirely true. And I want you to think of examples in your own life. The classic example, does the smoker not know that smoking is detrimental to their health, but they still do it? Does the individual that takes out their hurt through anger and rage and violence not know that's probably not the highest alignment of who they want to be or how they want to act, but they still do it, right? The individual that eats certain foods that are not good for their body, let's say processed sugary foods, they know it's not good for their health, but they still do it. We drink the Kool-Aid and we believe in the concept that if we accumulate knowledge, we'll do better. So what do we end up doing? What's that? When rubber meets the road, what are we actually doing in our lives? We listen to podcasts, we read books, we jump on webinars. Hello, here we are. And we collect information. But the question remains, what are you doing with all of that information? And my concern for you is the same concern for myself. If we're not careful, we end up drowning in knowledge yet starving for wisdom. So how do we derive wisdom? Well, information is knowledge, but wisdom is the application of that knowledge in a personally meaningful and impactful way that represents the best of who you are, right? It represents the best of who you are. And it requires a special tool. And luckily, we all have access to that tool. Unlocking your highest potential and better mental health requires asking better questions of yourself. We can't look to others to provide the answers that only come from within you. And we do this all the time. We forget to spend the time with the most important person, you, asking the most important question. Now, the next slide is the most important question from my vantage point, and it's the question that I ask everyone that I work with, whether it's a grade schooler or an executive in a multinational company. If I don't know the answer to this next question, I can't do my work. If you don't know the answer to this next question, I believe you're missing parts of your compass to help you show up to your health and your life in a better way. And that question is, who is your best leader? And when I say who is your best leader, I'm speaking to the version of you that decides to show up to the challenge, even when it's easier not to. I'm speaking about the version of you that commits to supporting yourself and others, even when you may not know how to. I'm speaking about the version of you that you feel the most proud of. The version of you that makes you feel strong, capable, like a leader, and that allows you to step into your health and your life and your masculinity in a mindful way. So, who is that person? Who is that person? Who is your best leader? And at the end of this presentation, I'll provide you with a link where you can do a free visualization that's about 15 minutes long. Well, that will help you decipher who that person is. Because when I ask who is your best leader, I don't want paragraphs and chapters. I want 2 to 3 words that align with your highest calling, with your values, that allow you to step into the version of you that I just mentioned. When we work with the individuals we work with, we do this visualization over about an hour and a half. So we're just giving you a little tidbit with this package that we created, but we think it's incredibly important. And I think you might be surprised what type of alignment and answers can come up when you spend the time asking yourself the right questions in the right environment. And so, as I've said many times already, I can't do my work without you answering the question. But I think more importantly, I don't believe we can show up to our lives in the most mindful and empowered way if we don't answer that question. So you may be thinking, okay, that's great. Sounds exciting. Maybe I'm a little bit inspired, but what does this have to do with mindful masculinity? And today, my answer is everything, but I wouldn't have always answered that way. In fact, I think I look at mindful masculinity as a topic that chased me down through my repeated personal and professional experiences and lessons. And I used to think, as I know many men do, that showing up as a man or a leader meant I had to show up as the high performer, the hustler, the breadwinner, the problem solver, um, the tough as nails, get shit done, leader among men kind of guy, right? And this attitude persisted in everything I did, from athletics to academics to even my intimate relationships. And on paper, sure, I had success in a lot of these domains. But there's a problem when it's only on paper. Because when I couldn't identify with those labels, I felt like less of a man. And in fact, during my darkest periods, I became very serious about harming myself. And the truth is that with that mentality, with that incomplete lens, I could never accomplish enough. I could never get enough done on paper for me to feel like enough of a man. And much of this side of my personal story, I've covered in my TEDx talk entitled All Vibes Welcome. So for the sake of time here, I won't go into it, but it's important to say that these distorted masculine descriptors, again, are incomplete conversations at best. They're anemic conversations. I didn't spend the time looking within and discovering who my best leader was, what my alignments were. And so I had anemic conversations with myself and everything around me, the world, in fact. And though these descriptions are generally accepted in our society, without proper dissection, without proper discussions of their meaning for each individual, they can be quite dangerous. And most often, what I see with the men I work with is that when these masculine titles or descriptors are examined more carefully, there's a true recognition that they're born out of trauma and they're born out of unregulated stress responses. And so it's my personal and professional experience that for each man to fully step into their masculinity, he needs to mindfully connect to himself through a much different conversation. Most often, we're caught in these emotional patterns, maybe not even realizing how we got here, and definitely having trouble getting out of it. So we need to mindfully connect in it with a different conversation in a different way. And a conversation needs to happen so that it helps balance, our response to life's challenges, to create a healthier identity for ourselves, and to evolve the definition of what it means to step into masculinity. And I think only then can we really start learning how to lead ourselves. And so I guess essentially what I'm saying is that a man who cannot mindfully connect to his power and his pain cannot fully express the best of himself. Let me say that again. A man who cannot mindfully connect to his power and his pain cannot fully express the best of himself. So, for the sake of this conversation, let's take a step deeper. And to do that, we have to define some terms. But before I actually dive in and define some of these terms, the place I want to start is by demystifying the term masculinity itself. So when I say masculinity, I'm referring to an energetic description that is present within all humans, not just men who identify with being a man. Okay? So to carry forward this conversation, we must be willing to appreciate that there is masculine and feminine energies within all beings, independent of gender, identification, social norms, sexual organs. This is not a binary conversation. This is not a binary framework. And my experience shows me that the deeper an individual accepts and steps into this form of thinking and feeling and behaving, the more closely they align with expressing themselves in life in a full manner. The more closely they align with expressing the version of themselves that they feel most connected to in life and business and their relationships. So when I say mindful, I simply mean being aware, being conscious, being present to, right? And that in itself is a skill. When I say masculinity, I mean energetically, the masculine goal is to be structure, goal oriented in the approach to the moment that they're in. When I say femininity, energetically, I'm speaking to an open and attuned approach to each moment. So if we take something like, and I know last week, meditation was brought up as the topic. So if we bring something like breath work, if I take it from a masculine standpoint, remember, energetically, the goal is structure and goal oriented, then I would say, I'm going to breathe 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. And I will stay in that place of I'm breathing 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, or pick your method, box breathing, whatever, right? You're sticking to it, and I'm going to do it for 10 minutes a day, and I have a goal, and then I move on. Well, what's missing is the feminine energy of being open and attuned to what comes up for you during your breathing. Open and attuned and willing to accept what may not feel good as you partake in this exercise. Open and attuned to the goal may not be met, and you might stop after 5, but you really wanted to do 10. And what does that say about you? What are you willing to discover in that? So if you have a goal and you're not using your feminine energy of open and attuned, you're half in, I would say, in expressing your whole self, expressing or experiencing your life. And then leadership becomes a little tricky. And again, when I say leadership, I mean a tool for capacity building for the individual first and foremost, right? So you lead yourself, you influence others. So when we're aware of how we're expressing or identifying with our masculine energy in relation or in concert with our feminine energy, that's when I say we're becoming mindfully masculine. It's the back and forth. It's the play between the two that allows us to step into our masculinity in a much different way. And I would argue in a much more complete way. And when it comes to leadership, I would say that the greatest leadership, what I call transformational leadership of oneself and the collective, in my opinion, that's one of the greatest embodiments of feminine and masculine energy. It's the greatest embodiment of being goal and structure oriented and open and attuned, and the balance and the dance that it can occur within each individual's energetics to then match the next person's energetics. And so let's go one step deeper. We're very used to having or conversation, this or that. Our society is just riddled with or conversations. Another way of saying that maybe is like, but this happens, but that. We're negating all the time. I want us to have an and conversation, this and that. And if you look on the masculine side of things, you have all of these hard, strong, leader qualities. And if you look on the feminine side, it's all like the softer skills, right? And I always say the softer skills are the most hardest to learn. But let's roll with this for a second. Let's say I'm a man that wants to be logical. But a man who's logical without having any sort of intuitiveness or groundedness or compassion or creativity or vulnerability, yeah, we've been around those people. It's hard. It's hard on them too, whether they express it or not. I want to be a man who's protective and honest and focused in my life. Okay, how are you to be protective and honest if you're not open, if you're not authentic? Again, if you're not compassionate or reflective? We need an and conversation. We're not giving our masculinity up by understanding and embracing our femininity. And I know this conversation is directed towards men specifically, but I would say the same for females. The energy can be picked up by both sexes. Remember, it's not dependent on gender, on sex. So when you do your work, if you do decide to take the visualization and you go through your words and you understand, as you'll be prompted to, what that really means for you, I want you to keep this in mind. It's an and conversation. If you really do the work and get clear with yourself and your intentions, I want you to think about energetically the words you've chosen for your best leader. Do they fit on one side or the other, or perhaps maybe both? I'd be surprised if they're only on one side. I'd be surprised if the energetics don't fall on both, that represent the best of who you are, how you can mindfully step into your life and express the fullest version of yourself. And so let's break this down a little bit further. There's these three areas that I think, as people, but specifically right now as men, we need to be focused on to be able to move in the direction we're hoping to move in, with better mental health, better leadership of ourselves, better, more positive impact and influence of the people around us. Number one is clarity. I call it your best leader. You can call it the best version of yourself. You can call it the badass you that, feels good in your skin. Call it whatever you will. Just be clear on who that version of you is. Be open to receiving the information, the intuition within you that knows what that is. You must become clear on it. And some people, when I get to this point, they're like, well, I don't know. I'll say this. You do know. You may have not been put in the right situation with the right questions to really bring it to light. Because I've never met anyone, over a decade of having these conversations, I've never met anyone who didn't have the answer to their own question. I've just met people who deny and dismiss the answers that come up. So sincerely ask yourself, do you not know the answer, or have you been conditioned to deny and dismiss the answers that come up for you? I can't say that for certain, but I've seen patterns, okay? I was one of those patterns for a long time. And, as a human myself, I still can exhibit those patterns if I'm not mindfully working through this. Then I ask you to have courage. I ask you to have courage to be compassionate and boundaried. I ask you to have courage to take care of yourself, but don't coddle yourself. And when I say courage, I want your personal definition of courage, not the heroic definition of courage. I don't need you to run into burning buildings or jump into icy rivers or whatever, you dream of when you think of heroic courage. I want you to step into your life. And I want you to ask yourself, what is one action? What is one thing I can do? Whether it's for myself or somebody else that is hard for me but meaningful. Now you're living a courageous life. So for most people, being compassionate towards themselves actually takes a lot of courage. To actually speak to oneself with love and respect takes a lot of training. To be boundaried in the way they give self-reflective feedback is a skill. To not go off the deep end or not coddle. We have these extremes, and I'm asking you to find the middle with compassion and boundary as your best leader. And then finally, we need to find people that can have this conversation with us. We need a community. We need a like-minded alliance. And so, you know, I'm not going to leave this presentation without asking you questions, because I said off the top, I can't give the answers. You have the answers. You just have to spend the time and energy. So what type of questions would one ask themselves to be clear and courageous and find community? Well, you can take a screenshot, or maybe Dr. Katie can send this out later. But who is your best leader? I go there all the time. Again, I'll give you a link at the end. Please do download it and use it and share. Who do I choose to become is the essential question. Whether you do or you don't, it's still a choice. Whatever you do or you don't is still a choice. And I promise you this, that I believe that some of your patterns, some of your challenges are embedded within your psychology, your physiology, all due to circumstances out of your control. I do believe that for a lot of us. But I also truly believe that is now, as adults, our responsibility to work with ourselves differently. So who do you choose to become is the major question here. And how do I show up differently as the best version of me? Once I recognize who that is, you know for a fact in conflict situations and challenges, in meaningful moments of life, you'll show up differently than your pattern self, especially if you're going through trauma, or you've put on a label on yourself that doesn't truly fit you. And then courage. Am I aware of my inner dialogue? Am I actually going to sit still and listen to what I say to myself and how I say it? What is my narrative? What is the story I tell myself? Right? I tell my clients all the time, listen, if you're gonna own your shit, then own your shine. If you're gonna say, yeah, but I'm this and that, and like talk to yourself in a negative way, then learn how to speak to yourself in a way that also acknowledges your shine. There's no one under the face of the sun that only has the shit. Where's the shine in your life? Are you willing to be honest with that narrative? And my pattern of behavior, behavior is what I can hear and what I can see. Words and actions. No mind reading here. So be honest with yourself. Will you have the courage to look back and journal or think or meditate or whatever on how do I use my words and how do I use my behavior, my actions? Is that the best of who I am? Is that who I choose to be? And then how do I change around certain people? We all do. Am I willing to have the courage to look at that? And then for community, I want you to ask, do I reach out to others with like-minded values? And who can help me grow into a better version of myself? I love the idea of men having conversations with men, but sometimes that's not the first step, and that's more than okay. Again, outside of the idea of gender, let's have the concept of community where we can have these type of conversations, as challenging and difficult, but also as inspiring and uplifting as they are, so we're safe. Do you have someone that you can have that conversation with? Or are you making efforts to find people that you can have that conversation with? And so as my last slide, I would say this, that hopefully I presented some information that was inspiring to you. But please don't find yourself in the same mindset trap and thinking next comes transformation. It does not. The next step is integration, right? And so we must spend the time to integrate, to embody, to understand, to gain clarity, to ask questions, to move into, to behave like. Not to fake it till you make it, but to practice it to be who you truly are. Welcome home. Remember your essence. And as a mindful masculine creature, you will take the time and energy to embody the two sides, the marriage of what is the goal-oriented, structured version of you and what is the open and in tune version of you. And together, like I said, when you embody that, when you work at it in concert, that's when you step into your mindful masculinity. So if you're open to that work and you're open to doing some of the visualization, the link is right there. It's mindshiftleadership.com/free. By all means, please use it, enjoy it. And if there's any questions, I'd love to have a chat with anyone and everyone. All right, Dr. Katie, I'm all yours.
Thank you so much for that very insightful presentation. It was very, I wrote down many things that I wanted to ask you more about. And I do want to say for folks joining us live on Facebook, if you have questions, please do pop them in the comment box and I will check in on those and, send them back. But to start off, I think it's we're circling back to this idea of healthy identity and how much that plays a role in really mental wellness and performance optimization. I think that balance of masculinity and femininity can be part of that. Um, but how do you find when you're working with your clients or from your own experience that plays into it, and how big of a role do you think gender plays compared to other ways that we identify ourselves or come to know our identity?
So is the first question, how do I feel like a healthy identity comes about for the people I work with?
Sure. Yeah, that's not what I asked, but that is a
Well,
great
well,
question. I want to know the answer to that.
well, I want to answer your question too. So please help me understand your first question so I can answer that.
For sure. Um, what I would um, what I would love to know is like what goes into a healthy identity? Like what are the pieces there?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I guess we're kind of similar in the question. So I'll see if I can answer both. Um, this may sound like I'm being overly poetic, but what goes into a healthy identity is whatever the individual thinks goes into a healthy identity, but is willing to to test it, pressure test it, is willing to step into it and ask meaningful questions. So a different way of saying that is like the words that come out of your best leader, the 2 or 3 words, your compass, whatever you want to call it. Katie, you and I could have the same words and it might have completely different meanings in our lives. So the first step is to actually just spend the time to go to the nooks and crannies of our consciousness, of our psychology, and to ask questions that are again within the visualization, to bring up answers that feel aligned to us. And then we can test that by asking, what psychological drivers we know much of humanity wants. Like we can ask questions about how closely does this feel like you're authoring the best of yourself, or you're developing yourself to be the version of you that you're most proud of. And then we can move into ideas like how much of this version of you feels like you're able to contribute to the people or the causes around you. And then finally, it's like, how much does this version of you feel like it connects to the fabric, the social fabric that is within your environment? And so what I did by those 3 questions, I just asked 3 psychological drivers that I know and we know through the research um, humans like having. They like to have self-development. They like to have the ability to contribute to something, a cause bigger than themselves. And they like to know that they're socially connected with the people around them and the environment around them. So it's kind of a two-parter. First one is very, you know, open-ended. Pick the words that resonate with you and define what those words are. And then the second part of it is testing it against the science, is what we like to do, and identifying the drivers that allow people to live a more engaged or fulfilled life, and see how that fits in. And then I think it's a really healthy way of starting the conversation of what's a healthy identity, right? Because at the beginning, it could perhaps be the identity that you're most used to practicing. But to be honest with you, most people, even people who are really, you know, working through some major psychological, mental health challenges, I find that when you do this work, there's something else that comes up. Even though the other patterns are more familiar and more maybe comfortable in some ways, other answers come up, and other desires to be connected to yourself and the things around you come up. And I think that's when we know we're kind of on the right track to what a healthy identity may be.
Mm.
Does that make
Thank you.
sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think a lot about this in terms of identity, because I do find that, working with mental health, with anxiety, with depression, there is so much potency to that sense of self, and being able to reconnect with it, because I think we're in agreement when you were saying, these sort of things, they're there. You always know them. You just I like to think of losing it. I don't, I find children so often have these pieces that I think more often over our lifetime we lose touch with them, rather than are things that we have never had a chance to access in the first place. But
Yeah,
either way, it's that reconnection piece of that. I did have another question
sure.
around your clarity questions, and who is your best leader? And I was really struck with your question of who do I choose to become? And I think so often, um, when there are mental health challenges, end up looking at what's going on in one's life and go, okay, this is not what I wanted for, or this is not what I want moving forward. And I heard so much compassion in you and saying, we all end up places that we didn't choose, but that we can have some choicefulness in terms of what our next steps are. Um, I guess first, I just wanted to say thank you for your clarity and explaining that in such a compassionate way. I think sometimes it's a difficult place to stand where you
Mhm.
are not creating blame and you are creating the opportunity for ownership moving forward. And I really respect the way you were able to do that.
Thank you.
And I wondered if you would just share how to begin thinking about that. Who do I choose to become, for someone who maybe hears that and is a little bit more antagonistic towards that idea that you can choose, yeah, that you can choose that.
Yeah. So I really appreciate the commentary, actually, because um, one of my best leader words is loving. So I'm always trying to be compassionate in the lens in which I express difficult ideas and concepts and situations, because there's never a lack. Um, sorry, there's never a situation where a lack of love will make it better. Um, so if someone's pushing back on this concept, as a coach, I hope I can recognize that they're pushing back based on patterns again. They're pushing back based on safety. They're pushing back on their idea of blame, first and foremost, probably on themselves, And then if they're not attuned to that, probably on the world around them and just an outward lens. So I think my question to that individual would be, again, because I don't give advice as much as I ask questions. And when it's appropriate, I'll give advice, but really start with questions. And so my question to that individual would be, especially if we're in a one-on-one, would be, then why engage in this conversation? Then why engage in this? And I've worked with people who are on the brink of ending their lives. So I don't say this in a flippant way. I don't say this in a way that I'm not aware of the realities for at least the people that I've had the privilege of working with. Again, when I ask them, why have this conversation? 99% of them, percent of their consciousness may be like, well, then screw it. But there's always that 1% that is at least hoping that something could be different. And that's what you choose to become, that 1%. Now we might have to like stick the jaws of life in there and like pry that open and turn that 1% to 1.5% and 2%. But I'm asking you to connect. And, Katie, you said it beautifully. I'm asking you to connect in a way so you remember. I often say to my clients, welcome home.
Mm.
When they get that feeling of, oh, there's something more to this. And I say, welcome home. So it's not a conversation of pull up your socks, big boy, which we can have that conversation, like we can have that conversation. But at least let's start with the, why don't we focus on the 1%? Because there's a whole reason why you came here, or you picked up the phone, or you jumped on Zoom, or right? There's a reason for that engagement. So you've already expressed choice. You've already expressed choice. So I just want to focus on that, because, let's get a little bit geeky here. It's much easier to create a new neural pathway than it is to destroy an old one. So what that simply means is focus on what you want in the way you want it. So I get, again, 99% of you is going to look at the past and how things have always been, but there's a percentage of you that actually had foresight into knowing there's something that could be different. So if it's much easier to create a new neural pathway than destroy an old one, then we must build the muscles of focus on the things that we do want. We must build the structure and the accountability, the self-awareness, and the support around those muscles, focusing on what we do want. And if you want to rewire the brain, here are your two ingredients: attention and intention. So focus and emotion. That's it. The more you focus and the more emotion you put behind it, the more your brain says this is super serious. That's what PTSD is on the other side of it. Rapid fire pictures are being taken because focus is really high and emotion is really high. So the brain says, this must be super important. I'm never going to forget it, is the feeling, right? So we can hack the system the other way. It just takes effort. I wish there was a magic bullet. And so a long-winded way of saying the person already expressed their choice. So we just have to focus on that.
Yeah, I love that reframe. It makes total sense and really aligns with the neurology that you were speaking in terms of backing that up and bringing that choicefulness into a clarity of where do you want to move, and let's put the attention there. You can always come up with reasons why to do something, why something's not going to work out, or what has happened in the past. But to say, no, this is what's going to be in the future is really like, this is life-changing work. And I mean that in a very positive way, not trying to sound dramatic by any means, but how you actually go about changing your life.
Yeah. And we've all probably seen the diagram on Instagram or whatever other social media where it's like I thought progress was like this, but really progress is like this, and just like a squiggle of lines going in upward direction. Um, if you haven't, I hope what I just did made some sense to you. But the point is, like, it's messy. It can be very messy at times, right? And that's why I said compassion. I want you to have the courage to have compassion and be boundaried. Like, don't let yourself get away with all the shit, but also go easy on yourself. It's a fine balance, and it's a conversation. And again, I'm repeating myself. It's a self-coaching conversation. So whether you read a book or you do coaching with me or you hang out with Dr. Katie or you just watch a program on TV, all of these, if they're going to work, are only going to work if you start having that conversation with yourself in a personally meaningful, impactful way, right? That's wisdom. So
Mhm.
constantly looking to me or Dr. Katie or anyone else, Tony Robbins, whoever you want to name, like it's not going to work because we haven't taken the time to integrate and to connect personally and to do the messy work that will eventually lead to some upward um, evolution. Yeah,
Yeah. Do you have time for one more question?
I do. I don't even know what time it is. I have time for 10 more questions. I always say when it gets a little bit later, I'm like, my child's asleep, my wife's asleep. I can go on for days, so bring them on.
I want to talk about this idea that we have, someone has maybe identified that their inner dialogue is, I'm going to say, not compassionate, because personally, I see that a lot more than completely unboundaried. Just a lot of speaking to, in men and women, um, speaking to ourselves in ways that we would just never dream of speaking to
Yeah.
someone we strongly hated or disliked. and and,
Some of
and
us do, though.
yeah, fair, fair.
Sorry, go ahead.
Um, but noticing those negative patterns, and certainly I think awareness is a very key first step to being able to change that, is even just to see that.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if you would share from your coaching perspective, once you see it, what comes next?
Yeah. I love this question, and I love the neuroscience of self-compassion. And um, I'm like, I feel like I like stand on the mountaintop waving the self-compassion flag and screaming it, like, because the science is so rich. And like, if you need the science, it's so there to unlock your highest potential, your performance, your connection, your love, like whatever you're looking for to like make more money or make more love or the both. Like, it's all there with self-compassion. Like, if you want to have a better relationship with yourself, it's like the science is so robust and exciting from that standpoint. And if you can't tell by my super enthusiasm, like, it's worth looking into. Um, so I also agree with you. You're absolutely right about awareness comes first with everything. But there's three factors or three steps, if you will, um, that scientists kind of have put together to look at if someone is in a moving towards a self-compassionate state. What are the steps to be in a self-compassionate state? And mindfulness obviously is one of them, right? To be aware of the pattern, to be aware of the conversation, to be aware of self. um, as important as that is, you can put that in pretty much in any category and it would show up, because how do you change anything that's you're not aware of? um, the next thing that would come up is um, common humanity. And common humanity is allows you to have the antidote to like the slippery slope that non-compassionate language takes you down, and that is like, you're the only one, right? You've messed this up. No one else in the world is as screwed up as you are, right? And common humanity asks you the question, like, who else knows this suffering? Who else around me or at the world at large or in the history of humanity has experienced this letdown, this hurt, this shame, this fear? It gives you a perspective. It's kind of like gratitude in the compassion world, right? It provides a deeper understanding and perspective. Like, really, seriously, are you the only one that's ever messed up this way? Right? It just, it's a step back.
Mhm.
And then number three becomes, as you said, the languaging. How would I speak to someone I cared about? Right? And that is a really great way of just saying, would I use these words? Would I not? What words would I use? And again, I talk about this in my TEDx, where when I was harming myself in my own car in an empty parking lot, a thought flashed in my head is, you know, what would I say to my sister or my best friend if they were sitting in the passenger seat doing what I was doing to myself, if they were doing it to themselves? Like, none of my answers were like with more violence. None of my answers were with like shaming them. None of my answers were like, you deserve this. And I don't know where that thought came from, but it really woke me up. And so sometimes when we're aware and we take a perspective of like, wait a second, I'm human. Other humans have experienced this hurt, this pain, this letdown, this whatever. What would I have said to that person? What have I said to my son, my daughter, my husband, my wife, my grandmother, my grandfather, my cat? Right? Like, what would I have said? And if we can start practicing that, then we're starting to move in a self-compassionate state. And the piece that I would add to that is, sometimes this is tricky because you have to hold space for the suffering self and pay witness to that. And it's a dual, I call it the dualities of a sane mind. It's the ability to hold two things at the same time. And your brain can do that. It just, again, takes practice. But sometimes we get tripped up in that process because it's like, who am I? Like, who am I speaking to? How am I holding space? But again, very simply put, mindfulness, common humanity, and language, self language. And when you can put those pieces together, you're taking the um, very productive steps towards being more self-compassionate.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. It's stepwise. So it's very easy to wrap your head around what that ends up looking like from a practical sense. And I think that's a useful tool for anyone listening to this. And it brings back to that I'm going to call it non-dual thinking, because that's a lot of the space that I end up in more from and into talking about spirituality like we will next week. But being able to have this non dual approach, whether that is to understanding your hope and your suffering, or whether that's looking at both masculine and feminine energy, it's a very healing mindset.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely can be. And um, I think we, again, as a society, we often drink the Kool-Aid. And right now, the Kool-Aid is mixed with a lot of happiness talk. And I have nothing against happiness, but I do know that that's not what's going to bring uh, major mental health changes as much as something like fulfillment and engagement would. And fulfillment, by definition, means applying effort towards things that are meaningful to you, which then by definition means you're going to, scrape your knees and fall down a few times because you're pushing towards something new and pushing outside the comfort zone. Then by definition, it means that we need to hold space in a comforting, compassionate way as we then build the resiliency and the strength to keep going forward. And and to look at challenges and narrate those challenges in a way that is personally meaningful again. Only then will we feel more purpose driven. Only then will we feel more um, engaged with the challenges around us. And again, this doesn't mean it's easy all the time. This doesn't mean you might not end up crying in the corner, as a therapeutic way of working through the day. That's okay. I'm so not against any of these expressive, moments of life. But the question becomes, then what? Do I know how to realign with the version of myself that I'm most proud of to take the next step and to rinse and repeat, right? So
Mm-hmm.
holding space for pain. Again, mindfully connecting to your pain as you mindfully connect to your power, right? Just knowing how to do the dance. That's definitely within all of us. And it's just a matter of a question of, you know, do I have the structure and the support? And then am I going to apply the effort? Yeah.
Yep.
I hope that makes sense,
It
Dr. Katie.
does. It does. I was just letting it soak in of that, is the structure and support there? And then am I going to apply the effort? And I honestly think that that is maybe the best place to leave this for tonight is in that choicefulness of, is this something that I want to apply the effort in right now, with honestly no judgment as to whether that is what you need right now or not. To folks watching, that is only something that you can know by listening to yourself.
Absolutely. Very well said. Uh, Whomever is listening to this now or in the future, um, know that there are people that deeply care for your journey, and know that the science and the spirituality is on your side. Um, there's no such thing as a broken person, just a deeply patterned one. And the spirituality and the science gives us insight in how we can unwind or change some of those patterning. So there's always hope. And I really thank everyone for their attention.
And thank you so much, Yashar, Dr. K, for coming tonight and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you. Thank you. A sincere pleasure. Thanks, Dr. Katie.
Okay, so I will share your link below this video, and if anyone wants to connect with you, I know they've got that website. Is there anywhere else where you'd like them to find you?
Yeah, no, that would be the best place. There's obviously contact forms and emails. If you want the email now, it's just hello@mindshiftleadership.com. And we'd be happy. We always are doing 20-minute discovery calls to figure out if it's the right fit and what you're looking for. So that's open and that's all available on the website. Otherwise, let's hang out another time. That was really fun.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks.